Let us now make our voices heard. I pledge to serve and to push my country. I pledge to live like a citizen.
Welcome to Civic Saturday. My name is Jená, and on behalf of all of us at Citizen University and the wider Civic Saturday community, both here in Seattle and across the country, I thank you for waking up and showing up on this lovely August morning to join together to nurture the spirit of shared civic community. I really love that it was the phrase shared civic community that got you excited. Let's do that again. In shared civic community. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are and why we've gathered here today. At Citizen University, we envision a great civic revival across our nation. Our dream is a country in which Americans are steeped in a sense of civic character, educated in the tools of civic power, and are problem-solving contributors in a self-governing community. With you, we hope to make sense of the moral questions we face as citizens and to develop capacity to act with character in the collective. We hope that by showing up here today, you will join us in spreading the belief that a strong democracy depends on strong citizens, that we all, regardless of where we were born or our documentation status, we all have the power to make change happen in civic life, and we all have the responsibility to try. So today, at Civic Saturday, that's what we're going to do. We think about Civic Saturday like a civic analog to a faith gathering, because it's about the renewing and reflecting on our faith in the idea of democracy and the creed of liberty, equality, and self-government that unites us. We've been holding Civic Saturdays in Seattle for 2.5 years, and now there are over 50 people that we've trained in our civic seminary, and they're holding Civic Saturdays in their communities around the country. Like us, when they hold their Civic Saturdays, they hear poetry, they have conversations with friends and strangers, they sing together, they hear powerful words of American civic scripture, a civic sermon, and then they form circles, like we will today, to talk about what we can do together. So right now what we're going to do, we're going to do 2 things. First, we're going to take a little minute to meet each other, and then we're going to have a moment of silent reflection. So here's how we're going to do this. If you are a returning member of the Civic Saturday community, I'm going to ask you to stand. And that will mean that the Civic Saturday curious will remain seated. And then what we're going to do, don't stand yet. I'll give you the cue in just a minute. Then I'm going to ask you to find a new person to introduce yourself and shake their hand and ask them to stand up as well. Now, if there are more people surrounding a new member, don't overwhelm them. However, more than one person can introduce themselves to another person. All right, we're going to do this briefly, and once everyone is standing, if you'll all please look up here, then I'll lead us in a moment of silent reflection. Sound good? Yeah. Okay. If this is your 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 15th Civic Saturday, please rise as a returning member of our Civic Saturday community. Awesome. So now, and I'm seeing a little island of Civic Saturday curious that are like, oh, what's about to happen? Sitting there, just take a minute, go introduce yourselves, just a quick, hi, this is me, what's your name? Shake their hands, have them rise, and then go back to your seat. Please do that now. So here's what we're going to do now. We're going to take about a minute to center ourselves and to root ourselves in this wonderful place called El Centro de la Raza with these wonderful people who are now your friends in the Civic Saturday community. And just be silent together so we can be here present now. So if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. Root your feet into the floor. And we're going to breathe together with deep inhalations. Please open your eyes. You may be seated. And with that sense of calm, centered, and collective breathing together that connects us all, I would like to invite our guest poet, Ebo Barton, to give us a poem.
Good afternoon, y'all. How are you doing? Good. So I'm a spoken word and slam poet. So when people are quiet, it kind of freaks me out. I'm also from Southern California. So originally, oh good. Poetry is a conversation, in my opinion. And so when you like something, you can snap. Well, y'all snap if you're able with me. You can stomp your feet if you're able. You can even like say words at me, like yes. Can y'all say yes? Yes. You can say go in, poet. Yeah, you could even say like talk about it, you know what I mean? Like you can say whatever it is that you want to say, because it gives me energy to then perform the poem for you so that I'm not like shaking and, with my paper or whatever, you get, okay. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay, great. I'm going to do a poem. There's a theme about roots that was happening, so I'm going to start with a poem about someone in my family, if that's cool. Does that feel okay? Okay. Great. See, y'all are learning so quickly. I love that. That's wonderful. All right, cool. So, actually, I'm gonna go the reverse way so that I end on a different note. How about that? I'm gonna talk about the neighborhood that I've been living in for a certain amount of time. I've been living in the Central District for quite some time now. I was living in the Central District for quite some time now. Because of the impacts of a lot of what's happening, I was forced to move to Tukwila, where because I basically got harassed out of the Central District, and I now live in Tukwila. So I'm gonna start with that poem, and then I'm gonna talk about somebody in my family later on. Does that feel okay? Yeah. All right, cool. Great. I'm glad that we're all in agreement. This is good. Civic stuff. Okay, great. You know that new store with all the construction that replaced that bakery, restaurant, boutique, coffee shop? Well, it's open, but it's a pet grocery. What is that? I don't know where they got the idea that people around here could afford groceries for their dog. Rocky eats Purina and leftovers. But ever since that new bus, train, trolley car, subway line, bike lane opened, everything has been water dripping from the electricity of the overhead wires. Like, why'd they take Uncle Keith's place and put in that new restaurant, bakery, bar that no one around here can even afford? It's like they are poking holes on our streets to see if we will leak from them. Every time they build, they rip at our seams, never give us a minute to mourn our holy open graves. They put up tombstones we can't afford to look at. Thomas moved. They said his lease ended and the rent for his apartment rose like $300. So he moved 20 miles south or west or north or far away from here. He works part-time at the pet grocery now. Says the commute is worth it. Got a 1-bedroom for the same price I'm paying for a studio with a broken heater my landlord is still waiting for me to pay for. It's like what we used to pay. It's like the only place that remembers us is too far to remember how to get back here. Painting all their new buildings colors we've been using in our artwork for years and calling it new and calling it right, making right angles of our cul-de-sac blocks. They call it cleaning up. Like we were the mess. They call us a dead end, but they're not calling this a dead end anymore. The city looks like an erector set of a child that wears a suit now, with a big office on the top floor of a building so high up he has no idea that people still live here. Do you know that people still live here? We've been living here ever since you redlined the rest of the city. We are still living, even if you didn't expect us to. The other night, we were sitting on Union. A group of like 15 white people in little shorts were running, walking, biking down the street. Moni said it was a club, but they never used to want to be here at that time of night. Moni said that Union was never the street to be on after 6 p.m. and be rich and white, but now they're running on our block when the street lights are on. They're running on our streets like they run our streets, being seen around here like they didn't used to avoid it. It's been so quiet here lately. The silence is so thick you could use dull blades to break it open. Find the pain in our backs from carrying the relics of what this used to be. Before we were worth saving. Before you tore down the boundary line, started putting up grand opening under new management, open for business, as if we have always been closed, unrestrained, only open for surrender. They find our music to play in their coffee shops as if to remember us fondly. It is clear we are unwanted. It is not clear where we should go. Thank you all. You're such a great audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. That was great. Thank you. Okay, well, hello, everybody. We're going to switch gears here a little bit. I'm Taneum Fotheringill. I'm the program manager for Civic Saturday. Welcome. What we're going to do now is have our turn and talk moment. So we've got the great energy going already, thanks to Jená, thanks to Ebo. And what we're going to do now is discuss for just a few minutes with somebody sitting right next to you, hopefully somebody you don't know yet, discuss this prompt that's up here. Where are you from, and what does that question mean to you? And I'll move in a second so you can see it. But take about 4 minutes each. Talk to the person next to you. If you need to, turn around, feel free. And then we'll take 4 minutes for the other person. And we want you all to get to know each other. So I'll hop up here and give you an announcement halfway. And so please get started. Thanks. That was beautiful. I loved it. What we are going to do now is have readings of civic scripture. So if you're the two civic scripture readers, great, there you are, perfect. So these are readings of texts and excerpts that reflect on the American Creed. They are context and food for thought prior to the civic sermon, which we'll hear in a moment here. And we encourage you to think about the thread that weaves these texts and the sermon together as you reflect on our experience here today. So I'm going to welcome up Conrad Cipoletti and Joel Domingo.
James Baldwin from Notes of a Native Son, published in 1955. The time has come to realize that the interracial drama acted out on the American continent has not only created a new black man, it has created a new white man, too. No road, whatever, will lead Americans back to the simplicity of the European village, where white men still have the luxury of looking on me as a stranger. I am not really a stranger any longer for any American alive. One of the things that distinguishes Americans from other people is that no other people has ever been so deeply involved in the lives of black men, and vice versa. This fact faced, with all its implications, it can be seen that the history of the American Negro problem is not merely shameful, it is also something of an achievement. For even when the worst has been said, it must also be added that the perpetual challenge posed by this problem was always, somehow, perpetually met. It is precisely this black-white experience which may prove of indispensable value to us in the world we face today. The world is white no longer, and it will never be white again. Thank you.
Excerpt from Chief Seattle's 1854 oration, as recorded by Henry A. Smith, published October 29, 1887, in the Seattle Sunday Star. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hollowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Even the rocks, which seem to be dumb and dead as they swelter in the sun along the silent shore, thrill with memories of stirring events connected with the lives of my people. And the very dust, which you now stand, responds more lovingly to their footsteps than to yours. Because it is rich with the blood of our ancestors, and our bare feet are conscious of the sympathetic touch. And when the last red man shall have perished, and the memory of my tribe shall have become a myth among white men, these shores will swarm with the indivisible dead of my tribe. And when your children's children think themselves alone in the field, the store, the shop upon the highway, or in the silence of the pathless woods, they will not be alone. In all the earth there is no place dedicated to solitude. Let him be just and deal kindly with my people, for the dead are not powerless. Dead, did I say? There is no death, only a change of worlds. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you to our readers. Thank you to our musician. Thank you to everybody who's gathered here this morning for time together. As Jená said at the outset, this shared civic community that we make simply by deciding to show up, whether we knew each other 20 minutes ago or not, is part of the gamble and the miracle that is democracy. You don't know what you're going to get, but when you actually show up, a bit of magic actually happens. And we're so grateful to you for being part of that magic today. I'm Eric Liu, along with Jená, the co-founder of Citizen University, and so glad to be with you this morning. I've been reading a novel this summer by Richard Powers called The Overstory. An overstory is the canopy layer of foliage in a forest. It also is the kind of word a child might make up to mean a story that contains all other stories. This novel happens to be both. It is about trees more than people. And if that sounds odd to you, it is worth remembering, as one reviewer put it, that, quote, trees do most of the things you do, only more slowly. Trees communicate. They warn each other of dangers and collaborate to pool resources. They look out for kin. They seek out opportunity and reckon with tragedy. Another recent and very popular book, The Hidden Life of Trees, by the German forester Peter Wohlleben, became both a global bestseller and a topic of scientific controversy because of the way the author spoke of trees as having wishes and thoughts. But whether you literally or only figuratively think of forests and trees as social creatures with intention and agency and desire, what is surprising about this thesis is that so many people still find it surprising. Even we who live in the evergreen Northwest easily forget what Chief Seattle spoke of, how webbed and interdependent life is. Even card-carrying tree huggers, like most of the folks in this room, when we get caught up in the marketplace and saturated in commercial and political messages of hyper-individualism, even we start to imagine that everything and everyone is autonomous and disconnected and self-made and brand new. The overarching narrative of our times, though we may not see it or acknowledge it, is that for better and for worse, our fates are bound together in a complex collective latticework of choice and consequence. That is the story of the overstory. My only quarrel with the concept of the overstory is that it draws our attention too much upward toward the canopy. To me, the understory matters most. The brush, the ground cover, the fallen trees that have become nurse logs. Most of all, the roots. It is from the understory in all its decay and untidiness that all other stories emerge. And it is the understory that most exemplifies our true interdependence. Richard Powers writes about aspen groves and their vast region-wide networks of roots through which a herd, a tribe, a nation of trees will move hundreds of miles over hundreds of years to seek a better life. I can tell you about 2 azalea trees and a plum tree in our yard that have collapsed over the years, their trunks hollowed out and unable to withstand a heavy snowfall or a parched summer, leaving a hole in the apparent scheme of life, only months later to yield new life and new suckers and aspiring bushes that spring from the resilient roots beneath, or seeds left behind. Jená and I actually brought some plums today, descended from a tree that fell 19 years ago in our yard. Now, not every root network is healthy. Some yield beautiful, fruitful vegetation. Others propagate noxious weeds. In a forest, as Powers writes, the living and dying that happen on the ground and under it are what make possible the majesty of what's on high. So it is in a garden. So it is in a democracy. We are gardeners of our democracy and community. When we work in the backyard or in a community garden, like the Beacon Food Forest down the street, we don't just sit back with a laissez-faire attitude and see what happens. We tend, we seed, we weed, we feed. We have a point of view about what should and shouldn't be there. We learn over time that what's visible and seemingly the product of our handiwork is only the final expression of a far more extensive reality that does not meet the eye or need our hands. We ought to pay more attention to roots and root systems in our lives as general lovers of nature, and especially in our lives as citizens. And this morning, I'd like to explore 3 conceptions of roots that are playing out today in civic life: where we come from, the root causes of our problems, and finally, the nature of radicalism. Let me start with where we come from. Every Asian American can tell you about a time, maybe in childhood or maybe 10 minutes ago, when a non-Asian, usually white, person asked, "Where are you from?" Whenever I was asked that, I would play with the questioner. I'd say, "I'm from Poughkeepsie." And they'd say, "No, where are you really from?" And I'd smile with mock understanding and say, "Oh, yes, actually, I'm from Wappingers Falls, which is just outside of Poughkeepsie." And if they persisted with some awkward or utterly unabashed version of, "No, I mean, where are your ancestors from? Because they sure as heck don't look like they're from here," then, depending on whether I detected malice or innocent curiosity in the question, I might finally say, "My parents were born in China and raised in Taiwan before they came to the United States, where I was born." I'm tired of telling this story. I'm tired of this cliched conversation, and tired of the fact that it's cliche mainly to people of color and not yet to all white people. I'm tired of the non-white man's burden of reciting a catechism to prove non-foreignness. Go back to where he came from. Now that the President of the United States has made that sentiment a part of public discourse again, it is worth considering what on earth that phrase actually means. Where is any of us from? Consider my mother, Julia Liu. Her birth certificate says she is from Nanking, China. She was born 10 months before the notorious rape of Nanking by Japanese soldiers in December 1937. But by then, she and her parents had already moved to the interior provinces, where her father could find a teaching job. They moved all around China during years of war, civil war, and revolution. When she was 11, she moved to Taipei, and that's where she went to middle school, high school, and college before she came to the US in 1959. Then she lived and worked in Manhattan, in Boston, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and eventually, in the mid-1960s, to Poughkeepsie and Wappingers Falls. That's where she and my father raised me and my sister. And when my father died suddenly in 1991, she moved down to the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where I was at the time. She's been there ever since, through work and retirement. She's lived in Bethesda, Maryland, actually longer than anywhere else in her life. This is where she created deep social networks, consisting mainly of fellow alumni of her middle school, her high school, and college in Taipei. And because she is now dealing with some major health challenges, as some of you know, she's leaving Bethesda in a couple of weeks to move here to Seattle. At least for a while, to be closer to me and Jená. And it's a move, it is an uprooting that she is understandably nervous about. So, where is my mother from? Where is she really from? Where do we locate the origins of who she is now? The answer to the question for any of us humans is as entangled and disorderly as a network of roots for any kind of flora. But when Donald Trump and his rally-goers ask or chant the question with malice, or propose to send people back to where they came from, it's really quite simple. They mean, your roots are not in our tribe of European Christians. They mean that real Americans, the ones with the greatest standing and authority to be here, are white and Christian. They mean that Americanness and whiteness should be understood to be one and the same, now and forever. Never mind that Americanness and whiteness began bifurcating the day Thomas Jefferson entwined his DNA with that of Sally Hemings. Or the day 400 years ago in Jamestown, which Trump recently commemorated in a speech that he recited like homework, when the seeds of self-government and enslavement were planted simultaneously in the soil of Virginia. Or the day just a few years ago, when a majority of new births in the United States became non-white. James Baldwin, whose birthday we marked yesterday, and who understood better than most that the more entangled our roots and origins, the more some of us would eventually pine for purity. Baldwin wrote in 1953, 6 years before my mother arrived in the port of Baltimore, that great American city, in the steerage cabin of a cargo ship, that America is white no longer, and it will never be white again. Baldwin's prophecy is coming to pass, and that phase shift has activated the race-based fear and the overcompensating nationalism of so many of Trump's white followers. Now, among progressives, this nostalgic white supremacy seems like such an obviously backwards and benighted worldview. But good multicultural progressives have a blind spot the size of Trump's Electoral College victory. There's a hole in their righteous superiority through which the practitioners of white identity politics can ride right on to victory. That hole, that blind spot, is called having no root story of your own to tell. You can't beat something with nothing. And too many progressives today have nothing. This was notable in the recent Democratic Party presidential debates. None of these candidates knows yet how to tell an overstory or an understory about what this nation is and what it stands for and why we ought to love it. It is not enough to say you are not the racist in the race. It is necessary to offer a substitute story of us, a bigger story of us. But too many progressives reflexively recoil at us and them language. And into that vacuum, Trump and his ilk get to define Democrats and progressives as wanting open borders, no nation, no clear identity as Americans, just special recognition for every subgroup. Now, some of you might be thinking, that sounds pretty good to me. Well, it's great for a John Lennon song. It is no way to win a national election. And it is no way to lead a mass, multicultural, democratic republic. The taproot of a substitute story of us goes like this. Our nation is founded on ideals and promises rather than bloodline or birthplace. And because those ideals are achievable by anyone, we create mixtures and combinations, mashups, that the rest of the world can't and won't. To love this country is to live up to the ideals of liberty and justice for all, and to welcome the new blood and the new energy that actually enable us to do so. To love this country is to have confidence that impurity and mixing make us more resilient and more adaptive. In botany, it's called hybrid vigor. We've got it. China and Russia don't. Advantage us. A similar dynamic is at work in city politics now. In the crowded city council races, who's telling a deeper story of what Seattle actually stands for? We know there is anger and there is resignation as our community incorporates a great wave of wealthy newcomers and displaces longtime residents and deals with the dislocations that have followed. Who calls us to feel something more, to believe in something more, to believe in something beloved? As you make your decisions and mail in your ballots by next Tuesday, August 6th, listen for that story of our roots and our origins. Listen for how inclusive the we is in any story that any candidate might tell. And for whether there is a theory of action that doesn't just celebrate inclusion as a nice progressive reflex, but actually says, what are we going to do with that inclusion? And what will we make out of it? Now, any root story is in part a fairy tale, as much an aspiration as a description. And I know that civic life is about far more than storytelling. But leadership without storytelling is just managerial technique. In times of great transitions, like the time we are living in today in the United States and in Seattle, people want leaders more than technicians. We want FDR or Reagan, not Dukakis or Romney. We want to understand what caused this phase shift and why, against all evidence, we can come out of it all right. Which brings me to the second dimension of roots to explore this morning: root causes. What are the root causes of poverty and inequality? Much of our politics today is an indirect proxy argument about that question. And what each part of the political spectrum offers by way of answers reveals why politics is so unsatisfying to so many citizens, especially those who don't know the code words or approved worldview of each ideological camp, but live mainly by common sense. What causes poverty? Structure and culture. Structure means systems, institutions, and policy choices. Culture means norms, values, virtues, and behavior. Too often, structure is missing from the right's account, while culture is missing from the left's. The left does not want to see spirit and values. The right does not want to see collective institutional legacies. But both are part of the root system of any society. Some problems are more about structure than culture, or vice versa. But no problem is ever about only one. People on the American left today love talking about structural change. Senator Elizabeth Warren, who I like a lot, used that very phrase during the debate this week. And I know many progressives have thrilled to Warren's "I have a plan for that" refrain, in which she has been detailing her policy proposals on a wide range of issues. Now, I happen to agree that we need major structural change in a tax code and policy framework that are built upside down to feed benefits and privileges to big corporations and the already affluent. I believe we need structural change in economic incentives to prevent a climate catastrophe. I believe we need structural change to remake a healthcare system that leaves so many people without their health or any economic security. But for one thing, if I were running for president, I would not call it structural change. That is the academic language of a technocrat and a social engineer. The more that Warren says, "I have a plan for that," the more she reinforces what will be a core Republican line of attack against her if she's the nominee. That she is an ivory tower, top-down, I know better than you, controlling centralizer who has plans for you. Nevertheless, that's campaign tactics. And that's for another day in another setting. Like I said, I'm a fan of Elizabeth Warren. My real reservation about overemphasizing structural change is that it leaves unaddressed the cultural change that is already underway and that is also at the root of our social challenges today. Opioid addiction and homelessness have been caused in great measure by structure, rules and incentives that steer people who are in distress or in pain toward situations that become disastrous for them and for the whole community. But opioid addiction and homelessness are also the product of culture, a culture in which we don't address our shared responsibility for individual pain and distress, in which we are taught it's everyone for themselves and get yours while you can, in which we are taught to express insecurity by punching downward at people with less, rather than upward at the people hoarding opportunity, in which the shame of being an insufficiently rugged individualist is greater than the shame of being an insufficiently loving neighbor, in which we shrug nihilistically at someone else's problem. Slavery and Jim Crow segregation were products of state action and money power, but what sustained them for so long and what ultimately undermined them was social norms. Religion and civic religion were used to justify slavery and Jim Crow, all the way up to the point when religion and civic religion were used to condemn and dismantle them. As much as addiction and concentration of wealth and homelessness are material crises, they are, in the first place, cultural and spiritual crises. Culture is upstream of law. Spirit is upstream of policy. The soul is upstream of the state. We cannot unpollute civic life if we clean only downstream. We must get to the source. And the source is our values. We are gathered here at Civic Saturday to rekindle the values of being a pro-social contributor to community, a person who recognizes that we are all better off when we are all better off. Spread such a belief widely enough, and policies that embody it will be easier to enact. Now again, I'm not suggesting that we focus only on culture. I'm saying that a citizen has got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, to change norms and to change policy. At Citizen University, we often use a simple equation to convey both dimensions of the root cause of anything. Power plus character equals citizenship. Being fluent in power means understanding structures of racism, class advantage, and sexism, and how to remake those structures. But being grounded in civic character means knowing how to lead other people by example and precept and story toward habits that foster a culture of mutual aid and shared responsibility. A society is not a mechanical puzzle to solve, or a pile of Lego or Tinker Toys pieces to turn into structures of your preferred shape and dimension. A society is a garden, a perpetually circulating overstory and understory of fears and hopes and wants that can grow in either healthy or unhealthy ways. If you want to radically change a society, especially a democracy, remember that it is made not only of systems, but of humans. And that brings me to the final aspect of my reflections today, the meaning of radicalism. Now, this both and talk that I'm using, this language of culture and structure, might sound to some ears to be moderate or centrist, but it is not. It is not a mere middle tone between a high note and a low note. It's a chord, the sounding of multiple notes simultaneously. In today's politics, radical is used to mean extreme or undiluted, uncompromising. Trump and his aide Stephen Miller are said to have a radical approach to immigration that's oriented toward making America more white. Medicare for all is called radical because it would extend government involvement in the provision of health insurance to its extreme. But when I say it is radical to insist that culture matters as much as structure and structure as much as culture, I don't mean that my belief is extreme. I mean that it is a root level truth. The nature of things is never purely one thing or the other. Purity tests may be useful tools for getting power, whether litmus tests by the religious right, or cancel culture on the woke left, or scare tactics by socialists or capitalists about each other. But these kinds of purity tests usually betray the underlying truth of our hybridity. Last night, I took a journey to an unfamiliar and faraway realm whose mores and customs I do not know well. It is called Bellevue. I was in Bellevue City Hall for a conference organized by a group called the Pathway Foundation. And Pathway was founded by someone you may have heard of, Conrad Lee, a Chinese immigrant who has served on Bellevue City Council since 1994 and was its first Asian American mayor. Conrad is 80, with the vitality of someone decades younger. But it is people far younger than he who organized this conference. High school students did it, mainly Chinese American, led by Edwin Ong, a regular participant actually here at Civic Saturday. And this room was filled with young students and their parents and teachers. I tell you about this gathering because it was an unlikely but fertile seedbed for radicalism. Unlikely because Conrad is a Republican, former stockbroker, and small business owner. Many of the parents in the room were temperamentally, if not also politically, conservative. The students were polite, and everyone's style was modest. The cultural style of so many Asian immigrant households centers on family and respect and relational obligation and not drawing undue attention to oneself. But the imperatives of power in white and male-dominated environments, like city halls or corporate meeting rooms, they reward self-aggrandizement and adversarial posturing. How, asked one student last night, how can I be myself while also infiltrating that power structure? The first thing I told her was to stop using the word infiltrate. That's the kind of word that incumbent power holders would use about you, I said, a young Asian woman in their midst. You're not infiltrating. You are entering, claiming, integrating that power structure by walking into the room. Yes. More than that, you are changing it by your very presence. Now, I told her, you have to believe, you have to know what you believe and why. Know the roots of your worldview and the origins of your full story. My message to her and to all the students, and in some ways, perhaps most pointedly, to their parents, was that American civic life right now could use more of a Confucian sense of propriety and memory, more of a Chinese spirit of duty and the long view. And our prime duty now is not just to kin and clan, but to community and country. America needs Chinese Americans to be fully ourselves, and Native Americans, and transgender Americans, and evangelical Christian Americans, and so on and so forth. America needs us all now to claim America and argue America so that we can be and become America. Now, is what I've just said right or left? The answer is yes. If we have binocular vision, then we can blend each eye's image, the left and the right, into something with greater depth and detail. We can look for and ask for something more true, more radically true in our politics. That is a habit of mind. If we perceive something like the coming automation of the economy as merely a structure problem with merely policy solutions, then we might support presidential candidate Andrew Yang's idea of giving $1,000 of monthly guaranteed income to every American, his so-called freedom dividend. But if we see automation also as a cultural and spiritual problem, we will remember that the dividends of freedom can never be fully earned or paid by a basic income, but also require mutual aid and trust and affection and people coming together to create clubs and associations and opportunities for creativity that can give them new purpose even as our robot overlords take our jobs. You cannot be a radical if you attend to only one side of the equation. To put it another way, You can only be a radical if you attend to both. In recent months, I've become a regular reader of Jacobin magazine, the smart, unapologetic journal of the new socialists of our time. The young writers and editors of this magazine are very good at asking long-neglected questions of first principle, like why adequate housing isn't guaranteed for every single person, and offering bracing answers that expand the frame of the politically possible. I've also become a regular reader of Imprimis, a monthly newsletter published by the very conservative Hillsdale College in Iowa. It too contains provocative ideas that challenge my baseline assumptions about what's normal in our society. That these ideas come from the right, whether nationalist or traditionalist or libertarian, doesn't to my mind make them inherently wrong, even if I do find many of them in fact wrong. The thing is, in this either-or age of partisan tribalism and ideological warfare, the truly radical thing for you to do as a citizen is to use both eyes. To resist the temptation to call me an enabler of the enemy just because I read both these publications and have been influenced by friends who read both these publications. I'm not triangulating. I'm identifying two strands of DNA and reweaving them. I'm unearthing roots and replanting them. I am seeing that the ideological origins of the American Revolution and the American idea are not exclusively left or right, and neither is the redemption of that revolution and of that idea. We are a hybrid nation, root and branch. We are a mixed, intermingled group of gardeners, tending a mixed, intermingled plot. We are the trustees of a republic in which every one of us can be said to come from the very same place. A few words scribbled on paper a long time ago. A grammar and logic of freedom and equality. A centuries-old habit of splicing our own roots into the roots of that language. The American overstory is e pluribus unum. The American understory is as complicated as your own heart and mind. Admit the complexity. Let it lead you to new forms of responsibility. Let it lead you to honor the living and the dead alike by living like a citizen, by showing up, by being at gatherings like this, by becoming literate in power and recommitted to character. Dead, did I say? There is no death, only a change of worlds. Maybe Chief Seattle said those words, and maybe they are a hybrid of his voice and some white man's imagination. Either way, they are part of our inheritance and our collective memory. And they express a sense of roots, root causes, and true radicalism that our city and our nation need today more than ever. Thank you very much.
Hello again. We are now going to go into my favorite part of the program called Civic Circles. So this is a time for you all to digest what you've heard, to process, and to talk some more with each other. So what I'm going to have you do in just a moment here, not quite yet, but in just a moment, we're going to form groups of 4 or 6 people. No more than 6. At more than 6, it starts to get a little bit rocky. So aim for 4 or 6 people. And whoever ends up in your circle is meant to be there. So you can turn your chairs, face each other, make sure you can hear each other. If you need to sort of spread out to the back, go ahead and do that. And please make sure that everybody in your circle has a chance to speak and be heard if they would like to speak and be heard. And for those extroverts out there, please monitor yourselves. For those introverts, I encourage you to take a second and speak up. We want to hear from all of you. So I'm going to put up the prompt, and 4 to 6 people, and here we go. We're going to talk for about 20 minutes. Oh no, there it is. What is a radical change that you'd like to make happen in your community? So I'll come back up here at about 20 minutes from now, and we'll have our community announcements, and we'll hear a little bit more from our poet. Okay, go ahead.
I'm being very direct and explicit about how I think about those things, and people are like, whoa, so you and then everybody started talking, and they like moved on from the conversation, didn't want to address it. And I'm the type of person who's like, this is hard and interesting and complex conversation, we can have it.
As soon as they get here, the existing members of that culture reach and say, oh yes, you're one of us, come in. Right. And if you aren't already a member of that culture, then it can be very difficult to find location. Like your first question, what is community? I can say 4 or 5 different communities that I belong to because I've made a home within these 4 or 5 different communities. I don't have a single community.
It's a culture of like you accomplish and you do all the time, and that's the measure of success in America. And so then we think about like all these different things in really like stark terms of like individual success.
So it's a sort of a mindset that you get what you need, but you also have to worry about the rest of the community.
If you're thinking about only your own profit, the collective community is not going to prosper. You have to think about everyone else, but so many people have tunnel vision.
Most of my students didn't even know that the Japanese internment had even happened. They had no awareness whatsoever. And there were so many historical events that are so important to understanding why things are the way that they are in this country, why there's tension and strife, and if you don't have that awareness.
Welcome back, and hello. So thank you so much. The energy that comes off of those conversations just is so, it just radiates throughout the room. So thank you for taking the time to talk with each other. And I hope you found that really useful. And I hope that it'll help you as you transition from being here and listening and thinking. Now you've gotten a chance to talk it out. And I hope that as you go out after this, you continue to think and start to do. So what we're going to do now is have some community announcements, which I'll open up the floor to in just a second, and then we'll officially close out by one more poem. So community announcements are just a chance for you to pop up, raise your hand, I'll call on you. If you have something going on that you want to share, could be anything. It could be something coming up, something you're organizing. Please feel free. So I will start out and say, thank you to Seattle Channel and Elliott Bay Books for being here. Thank you to El Centro de la Raza for hosting us. Yes. If you have not had a chance yet, in the back corner over there's a table that has civic love notes. And so as many of you know, we've started having Civic Saturdays all over the country hosted by a group of folks who we train called Civic Seminarians. So between now and October 5th, which is our next Civic Saturday, hope to see you there, we will be having at least 5 other Civic Saturdays going on across the country. So back there's note cards and pens, and that's your opportunity to send a note of hope or encouragement, inspiration, a thought, just a hello to a Civic Saturday somewhere else, because people are showing up all over the country just like you did today. So please take a second as you leave to write a note to them. The sermon is going to be available online on our website and on our Facebook page later this afternoon. I want to give a special shout out to Christy, Athena, and Laurette and Elsa, who are our new team members at Citizen University. So welcome to them. We're so thrilled that they're on the team now. So with that, I'd love to welcome back up Ebo.
Hello again. How are you feeling after your conversations? Refreshed and energized and ready to take on the world, I'm sure. Because you got all the answers, right? Okay, great. So I'm going to do a poem. It's actually about one of my family members. It's about my biological father. One thing I would like you to take away from this is that I'm encouraging you all to either be comfortable in silence and to listen, and or to no longer be silent. Does that make sense? Cool. And if it doesn't, sit with it for a while. All right, cool. It has been 14 years since I've seen you. Could not point you out in a crowd of 3. You left me twice. The first when I was 2, and the second when I was 14. It was as though you could not leave me enough. As though my infant brain could not remember the sudden absence of your screaming voice climbing the walls of all my future relationships. As though it was my fault. I've heard that you and I share features like a dinner I've been force-fed for as long as I can remember, but you won't even sit at the table with me. My memories of you include when I cut my foot at 3 years old and got 12 stitches. You said, I wrote my first poem at 6. A personification of a street sign I remembered how to spell. You reacted to it like, I got my heart broken for the first time when I was 14. A girl who could not understand my obsession with wanting to spend every lunch period together for a week. When she said we couldn't hang out anymore because I was weird, I went home to cry to the day you left. The last words you said to me were, give these keys to your mother. And I said, and I've responded to you like this ever since. Are you proud? I learned something from you. Will you tell my ex-wife that I stayed 5 years too long? I was learning how to stay and not be my father's. Will you tell my friends that I don't know how to tell them how I'm feeling? Because, dear absent father, missing dad, the silent screaming in the gaping holes of my emotional inabilities, this is an obligatory letter to my biology that I will leave at the roots of a tree I can't even identify. What is the purpose of explaining who I am to you if you don't even recognize the miracle I've always been? I am, it feels like, you should know this about me. Dear Dad, is it because I am too, that you did not want me, but I still exist? I am so painfully permanent, but I am such a miracle. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. That's it. Grab some coffee on your way out, and we hope to see you next time on October 5th. Thanks, everybody.